What about the methods of evacuation for disabled then? The code does expect inclusive design. It does expect you to allow access for people with disabilities. However, the problem is you've got to be careful. When you're letting people in, can you get them out? Now I'm going to give you a scenario. I want you to pretend you're the manager of a 3-storey library. You've got a lift giving access. You've got a lift, 3-storey. Will you allow people in wheelchairs access to the top floor of your library? Will you allow that access? Will you? Well, you have to. If not, you'll get done for discrimination. How are you going to get them out if there's a fire? How are you going to get them out? What you need is a refuge on the top floor. And the refuge usually is the top floor, is the stairwell. Top of the stairwell. Protected area. And then people say, leave them in there for the fire brigade. No, it's not our job. It's not the fire brigade's job to evacuate people in wheelchairs. It's your job to have procedures in place. We will help, but it's not our job. I don't want to turn up to a building with 5 firemen, you turn out and you say, I say, is everyone out of the building? You say, everybody's out, mate, apart from 47 people in wheelchairs. There's only 5 of us. You should have methods. You should have evacuation chairs or evacuation mats, some method of evacuating people in wheelchairs. Right, you've got that in place, you've got an evacuation chair. Your refuge can only hold 3 wheelchairs. Can you restrict the use of the top floor of that library to only 3 people in wheelchairs? Can you do that? If your refuge can only hold 3. Now I asked that at a seminar I held, and there's about 80 people on this seminar. And do you know how many people put their hands up to say you could do that? 1 person. Only 1 person put their hand up. Well, I'm telling you now, this is my opinion, by the way. My opinion is that not only can you do it, you have to restrict the use of the top floor library to only 3 people in wheelchairs. Someone said to me, you can't do that, that's discrimination. I'll tell you what, let's pretend you don't believe you can do that. You make no restriction. You walk in your library, Tuesday afternoon, top floor, you walk in there, there's 37 people in wheelchairs. What are you thinking right now? I'll tell you what you're thinking, mate. I hope the fire alarm don't go off. All of a sudden, no. What should we do? What should we do? First 3, refuge. Everybody else, hang on. You have just created a situation you cannot deal with. In other words, you've got to make sure that you give access, but you've also got to make sure that you can evacuate. You've got to take it into account, and that's what the code says. Another one, about impaired hearing. You've got to make sure you've got a method for evacuating people with hearing. Basically, you've got to do a GEEP, a generic emergency evacuation plan. For example, if you're the hotel manager and someone books into your hotel who's totally deaf, will you allow that person to sleep in your hotel? Will you? Well, you've got to. If not, you'll get done for discrimination. But how are you going to get them out if there's a fire? How are they going to hear the alarm go off? They're not going to hear it. Oh, people say, don't worry. All you do, you put them near the ground floor and you go get them. I see 2 fundamental problems. First of all, how are you going to get in the room? They've got a deadlock. They'll be deadlocking the door. Second thing is, 3 o'clock in the morning, you send a porter into someone's room, the alarm's gone off, you walk into their room, they're asleep. You go like, excuse me, mate, they wake up, there's a guy on top of them, what are they going to think? Are they going to think, oh, the fire alarm's gone off? I'll tell you what they're going to think, they're getting mugged. That porter's getting his head beaten in. All I'm getting at is that's what they do, they shouldn't do that. What you should have is flashing lights in the room, and you can get vibrating pillows. You get a pad that goes under the pillow, vibrates, wakes a person up. You've got to do GEEPs, generic emergency evacuation plans, part of your risk assessment. In buildings like colleges, they have vibrating pages where you put it in your pocket and the alarm goes off, makes a vibrator page and it goes off. That's what you should do. Now, when allowing these extended travel distances, it may be necessary to include measures to assist the management to aid evacuation of disabled. What it's saying is, extended travel distances consider things like CCTV in the refuge or the call points. You know, call points, the refuge. You should have some form of communication anyway in a refuge. Consider handrails in the corridors to assist. More exit signs to find the way out. Consider people with disabilities. What about maintenance then? Now, these fire protection systems might not provide for the continuity of the fire safety strategy if they're not regularly and properly inspected, tested or maintained. You've got to make sure you maintain them all. Test your call points every week. Do emergency lights every month. Part of the requirement. Some people do it, some don't. You've got to do this. There's no point having all these things if you don't test them. What about commissioning and handing over? Before accepting the building for occupation, you've got to make sure it's safe. The design of the building and the safety systems must be recorded, and you've got to carry out a complete installation check. Carry out a handover. Who should be at the handover? You should try and ensure the management's there. I know it's not always possible. Try and ensure. Tell them what it is. What's that? It's a sprinkler head. What does that do? Well, I'll tell you what, mate. If you block off that sprinkler head about 200 mil from there with combustible materials, it won't operate. Tell them these things. Tell them what they are, how the systems work. They've got to be aware, appreciative of what they are. You've also got to produce a fire safety manual. This is critical. Fire safety, similar to ADB, you've got to print. And Annex H will cover the details required. And who should start this off? Designer. The designer should start off fire safety manual, putting down what the building's going to be used for everything. Start off the manual straight away. You've got to produce a fire safety manual. And this covers these factors. You've got to set out the basis the building was designed. This is critical. If you've got a building, you extend the travel distances because you've got a 4 metre ceiling height, you've got to write that down. So that if the building manager who moves in afterwards looks at the ceiling and thinks 4 metres high, I'm going to put a false ceiling in. You can't do that. You can't do that because that 4 metres is critical in the design of that building. It's critical. In other words, if you make it 3 metres, you've just knocked off the benefit that I've allowed in the high ceilings. You see what I mean? You've got to put things like this down. Now, if that building's got a 4 metre ceiling height and you haven't taken it into account in the design, in other words, you haven't taken into account and allowed extra travel distances, now can they put a false ceiling on? Yeah. Because it's not going to impact on the means of escape. Do you see how important it is to set out the basis the building was designed so the person doing the risk assessment knows they can't change certain things? It should explain the operation of all the systems, how the sprinklers are going to work, how the smoke control works. It should provide information for the responsible person to do a fire risk assessment. Because before that building is occupied, a fire risk assessment has to be done, and that's what the fire brigade will want to see under the RRFSO. You've also got to design the building so it can be managed. It can be managed. All right, then I design a building, I put in 1,000 emergency lights, and every single one of those emergency lights has got a test switch located 2.5 metres up. Is that building manager going to send someone round every month to test all those 1,000 individual emergency lights? Are they going to do that? No. Does that building meet building regulations? No. And the reason is building regulation states that if a building is designed on an unrealistic management regime, it cannot be considered to meet the requirements of building regulations. Well, I'm telling you now, you know they're not going to do that. You know they're not. They're not going to do that. That building doesn't meet building regulations. What you're asking for now is 1,000 emergency lights. I want you to trunk them all into a separate area so we can test the emergency lights on a monthly basis. Or trunk them into certain areas. Make it more realistic. That's not designed right. You've also got to design for good housekeeping. Don't forget, housekeeping causes a lot of fires at Bradford Stadium, King's Cross, down to poor housekeeping. Give them somewhere to store things. If you don't, they'll be storing them in the corridors in the means of escape under the stairs. That's what you've got to do. Provide storage spaces. You've also got to take into account fire safety system availability. You've got to consider downtime for maintenance. At some point, they're going to have to maintain the sprinklers. They might have to take them out. They might have to drain the system down. Well, if you do consider downtime, when are you going to do it? When the building's not occupied. You should have clearly defined times when it's going to be offline. You should risk assess if it does go down. Yeah, risk assess. If it's going to take the sprinklers out, especially if they're life safety sprinkler systems. For example, the Trafford Centre. It's got life safety sprinkler systems in there, and what a life safety sprinkler system does is if you've got sprinklers in with a life safety system, they've used a different size fire for the design. In other words, they use a 2.5 megawatt design fire size based on fast response sprinklers. If they didn't have sprinklers, they'd have to design on a 5 megawatt fire. So they use a 2.5 megawatt fire based on fast response sprinklers. Now what happens if on a Saturday afternoon the sprinklers go down in the Trafford Centre? Someone comes out, boss, the sprinklers have gone down, we've had to isolate the mains. What should they do now in the Trafford Centre? Well, they've got a risk assess. Has that affected the design? Yes, because now if there's a fire, you're not going to get a 2.5 megawatt fire, you might get a 5 megawatt fire or a bigger fire. In other words, now you could argue that Trafford Centre is unsafe. Because if there's a fire now, it'll go a lot bigger than the design fire, and that smoke control will not be able to deal with it. You could argue if there's a fire now, somebody's going to die. You either shut down the centre or you put other measures in. Do they do that? No. Do you know what they do? Get somebody out, get maintenance out, carry on as work as normal. Really, that has a massive impact on it. And that's why you've got to consider that. I know one shopping centre that I was talking to, what they did was they paid the local fire brigade to park their fire engine outside that zone while the sprinklers were down, and the idea was if there was a fire, fire service intervention would keep the fire down. And I thought, that's a good idea. All I'm getting is you have to consider this. You may want to consider a duplicate system, and especially have some replacements, have a few sprinkler heads ready. What about your fire doors and escape routes? Look at that. Does that look all right? That's a fire exit. Can you imagine? Bit stiff, bit stiff. Who put that skip there? Fire doors. Does that look all right? What about that? What about that one there? Do you have to duck? That one there is for security. No one can break into that lower flat. When a fire alarm goes off, which exit should you leave by? Which exit should you leave by? You should leave by the nearest exit. Which exit do people like to leave by? I'll tell you what, people like to go out the way they came in. That is human behaviour. We like to go out the way they came in. We used to do fire drills and everyone's going for those front doors. And in the fire brigade, you know, I was in the fire brigade, we used to think, we'll show them. We bought a smoke machine, we smoke logged the main entrance to set it up. We smoke logged the main entrance, set the alarm off to see what they did. You know what people did? They walked down the corridor, they saw the smoke, they carried on walking. What are you doing? You don't walk down there. They said, I knew I'd make it. It wasn't very far. People, what? This code reflects this. It says, you know people are going to do this. So what? Design the building better. Don't have one way in, 3 exits at the back that no one's going to use. Try and design it better. Have 2 ways in, 2 ways out. Try and make the way out and the way in the normal route. Because if not, people don't. That's human behaviour. We like to go out the way we came in. And that's what the code is asking you to consider in your design. What about the fire resistance of structure? How has this changed with BS9999? Well, in BS9999, you can use table 25 or you can use table 26. 2 tables. However, if you're going to use table 26, you have to use that formula. Which table do you want to use? I'll tell you what, most people, 25, I'll just use 25. No, you can't. This code takes into account ventilation conditions. And what it says is, if you've got good ventilation conditions, you can effectively reduce the fire resistance of the elements of structure. That's what this has brought in. What does it mean to you and your clients? Well, if you can get good ventilation factors, you can reduce the fire resistance requirements of all the elements of structure in the building, effectively save your client hundreds of thousands of pounds for the design, taking into account the ventilation conditions. So you do have to apply this. You do have to apply this factor to consider whether or not it's a favourable condition on ventilation conditions. But this is a new factor that's been brought into BS9999. New factor. What's it going to promote? Well, it's going to promote possibly more glazing. We like glazing. Don't mention L1, L2, but it's going to bring in more glazing. That's what it's going to do. Now, I want to ask you a question. Is a building designed to ADB sustainable? This sustainable or carbon footprint image? Well, I'm going to say no. Because what I'm going to say is, if you design to ADB, you might have an office with 4 staircases. Now, if you'd use BS9999, which is a more performance-based code, that same building only requires 2 staircases. In other words, because you don't want to use BS9999, you've just stuck on 2 staircases to meet travel distances to ADB when 9999 quite clearly says that same building only needs 2. You have just put on 2 staircases. What is the carbon footprint for a staircase? We're talking about carbon footprints now. A building designed to 9999 gives you a lot better carbon footprint than a building designed to ADB. That's why, another reason why you should be using BS9999. It produces a much better carbon footprint because you're designing it based on the risk profile, not on, well, we'll put them on just in case, an extra couple of staircases on. Now I can ask you a question based on what I've taught you now. Which building's safer? I've got a building built to ADB with an 18 metre travel distance, dead end, with fire doors that are 50% reliable and not wedged open, yeah? I've got BS9999, I've got a 30 metre dead end, it's got some early warning and sprinklers, and it's fully protected. Which is a safer building? Well, I'll tell you what, with the sprinklers in there and some early warning, and I think 9999 is a safer building. It's designed as a safer building. ADB, 4 staircases, you've got 45 metres, it's got 4 staircases. 9999, you've got 90 metre travel distance, you've got early warning, and you've got sprinklers. Which building is actually safer? I think BS9999 buildings are safer. Although you're extending the travel distance, you take into account putting in sprinklers. People don't die in sprinkler buildings. Go to America. It's fact. People don't die in sprinkler buildings. So by putting the sprinklers in, allowing you to change the risk profile, extend the travel distances, actually it's a safer building travelling further than ADB with 4 staircases. And if you're a designer now, and you stick 4 staircases in for your client, and I get another client, another designer that puts 2 staircases in, what's your client going to say to you? What have you put 4 staircases in here for? He's only put 2 in. Yeah, but you need them for the travel distances. Well, he doesn't. Do you understand? In a competitive market, you better pick the right code. Who decides if the work meets the requirements for building regulations then? Well, it's ultimately the relevant building control body and ultimately the courts to decide whether any specific piece of building work meets these requirements on a case-by-case basis. However, other methods may be used if the building control body is satisfied that in this case the functional requirements have been met. thus preserving design freedoms. In other words, design a building to BS9999, you have demonstrated the functional requirements have been met. Can you use BS9999? Well, do you know, when it was the DD9999, I rang up the Department of Communities and Local Government at the time. And I said to them, can we use DD9999? And they said to me, the onus is on the developer to demonstrate the design satisfies the functional requirements. I said, I know that, but can we use DD9999? And they just told me, no, the onus is on the developer to demonstrate the design satisfies the functional requirements. They wouldn't actually give me an answer. But what I'm trying to say is, yes, you could. You could have used DD9999 years ago. People are scared to use these codes. BS9999 has got full British standard status now. Now, did you know that if you use Approved Document B, which everyone thinks is the Bible, yeah, Approved Document B is the Bible, they're saying is the guidance given in ADB has been approved by the First Secretary of State as one method that, if followed, will tend to show compliance with the statute. ADB will only tend to show compliance. Well, BS9999 will tend to show compliance. You can use BS9999. Now, I would like to point out to you again about BS5588 being used. This is a statement from ADB. It said, if this version of the standard has been revised or updated, then you may use the new one. Well, BS9999 clearly states in it that it withdraws BS9999. And someone says to me, yeah, but it says that says withdraws. ADB says revised or updated. Would you say withdrawing a standard is quite a big update? In other words, yes, it has. It's withdrawn BS5588. Now, I've just come back again. I was in Singapore. And I was in Singapore, and while I was out there, I was trying to persuade, because BS9999 is an international code. And at the moment, they are using 5588. And all regions in the area generally follow Singapore. But they have problems with travel distances, and they're trying to get a more performance-based code. And I went out there and I was discussing with a few architects and designers BS9999. Now, a lot of their buildings are sprinkled anyway, and they've also got early warning, so the code would be... And I think what's going to happen is Singapore and that part of the world will start to use BS9999 before we do. Now, they're looking to... Do you think that's bad? It's taken us 10 years to write this code. And if Singapore adopt BS9999 before we do you think that's a bit bad? We've drafted another code, and around the world they're using it and we're not. Get using it now. Get using it now. This BS9999 is an innovative code which offers the client design flexibility. It replaces or withdraws BS5588. It offers an alternative approach to ADB with major advantages over it. And again, I'm saying my opinion is ADB version 2 will not be used when you realise how good BS9999 is. Can you afford not to use BS9999? Yeah, can you afford not to? Competitive market. Who should use 9999? All designers. It's not a fire engineering code, but it's a code based over ADB with major advantages. It's a fire engineering principles. All architects' practices that have any involvement in any design other than small residential should look at using this code. However, consult with building control early. Don't get a design, put it through and say, get that through. That's what people do. Don't do that. You're losing the benefits. Consider 9999 straight away and get the most out of the code. That's what happens. Consult early. Don't just say get it through. Now, I hope you enjoyed this seminar and feel a bit more confident in applying the code. This is the future in fire safety, so start applying it. Now, we do offer other seminars on our site. And the follow-on from this is BS9999 means of escape, which basically I will then go through how you apply the 10-step guide in determining the means of escape to this code. In other words, actually show you how to apply it to get the most out of it. Travel distances, stair widths, corridor widths. Thank you.